Disclaimer, this is a video of me reacting to someone else's Five Nights at Freddy's theory. I don't always agree with them, but that has nothing to do with how I feel about them as a person, or even their channel as a whole. I have and will continue to make it clear that I am a fan of this creator, and this video is simply me providing my own opinions on their theory. This video is not trying to say that I know better or am better than this creator, it's simply me seeking out other people's opinions so that I can explain the things that I agree with, the things I don't, and so I can understand these alternate opinions whether I agree or not. Anything negative I say, or any negative reaction I have towards the theory is just me disagreeing, and I will always explain my point of view. Whether you agree with my stance or the creators, please just be civil towards both of us in the comments. Thank you, and enjoy the video. I know nothing about this video. I literally do not know what he's gonna say. I see Fruity Maze. FNAF, the ultimate midnight motorist theory, 24 minutes and 50 seconds. It's gonna be a long reaction. Alright, let's go. 2 years ago.
Gregory? I got your message.
Scott Cawthon? I have things to say. Stay. Stay for a second. Scott Cawthon. Midnight Motorist? We need to talk. Uh-oh, God. No! Scott. Wait. I've spent the last 2 years of my life dedicated to figuring out the biggest mystery in all of Five Nights at Freddy's, Midnight Motorist. And in this video, I'm gonna share everything that I found. This is by far the most comprehensive FNAF breakdown I've ever made. Let's get started. Midnight Motorist is one of 3 lore-heavy minigames in FNAF 6, with the other 2 being Fruity Maze and Charlie's Death minigame. FNAF 6 is the most lore-heavy game in the franchise, and that's on purpose. In the interview Dawko did with Scott Cawthon, Scott stated that FNAF 6 was made explicitly to answer questions regarding the story.
That was a game that was born out of necessity because I needed to kind of bring a conclusion to several events from the series.
This means that the most vague and mysterious minigame in all of FNAF came from a game that was supposed to tie up loose ends. And as ironic as that is,
and then it ended up being more
fascinating.
confusing.
It makes me wonder what Scott was thinking when he made this minigame. Did he intend for it to be this big mystery, or is he genuinely shocked that the community is still trying to figure it out? In a game that does answer a ton of questions regarding the story and gives a satisfying and epic conclusion to everything, Midnight Motorist is virtually the only thing in the game that feels unsolvable, and it's because of how random it is. The minigame takes place directly after Charlie's death. Afton pulls up to the pizzeria, kills Charlie, and speeds off. Midnight Motorist is showing us where he sped off to. We know this because the minigame is labeled later that night in the game files. The minigame shows Afton driving.
And we also
back
know
home.
now that it absolutely is Afton, which I already kind of thought was obvious, especially because of Curse of Dreadbear and like the whole Afton house on the hill, and then you looking at that, turning the car lights purple. So I always kind of thought that it was pretty clear that it was Afton, but there was confirmation with, I think, 5 Laps at Freddy's, because there was a Spring Bonnie head in like a Midnight Motor or something like that, right?
But before he gets there,
so yeah, we know it was
passes
Afton.
A clearing in the woods containing a mound of dirt and a bar called Junior's that he was apparently kicked out of. You can even see the bouncer standing at the entrance, who promptly tells Afton, "Come on, you know you can't be here. Don't make this more difficult than it has to be." This is the part of the minigame that makes the most sense. Scott was giving us important context to Charlie's death by showing that Afton was under the influence when he killed her, possibly explaining why her death was so sloppy and spontaneous. Afton then eventually finds his way home, walks in the door, and is met with someone watching TV. The person says to Afton, "Leave him alone tonight. He had a rough day." Afton then goes to the bedroom only to find that it's locked. Quote, "I told you not to close your door. This is my house. He can't ignore me like that. I'll find a way in from the outside." He then goes outside to find that he escaped through the window, along with some animatronic footprints next to the bushes. Afton then says, "Ran off to that place again. He will be sorry when he gets back." Then the minigame ends. Even with the full context of the minigame, there's a whopping 5 big questions left unanswered. Who is the person watching TV? Who is the runaway? What was buried in the middle of the woods? Where did the runaway run off to? And why are there animatronic footprints by the bushes? In order to
I'm just gonna pause here and give my thoughts on everything. So first, who's watching TV? I'm still a believer that this is Michael. Because, well, he's wearing it's a person wearing a gray shirt, and a lot of people say that also he's watching TV just like Michael does, but obviously watching TV isn't a character trait, but I feel like it just makes the most sense because I think the runaway is the bite victim. Because I think that the thing about Midnight Motorist is it's not just a random minigame, and it's not just supposed to take place after Charlotte's death for some reason. I think it's trying to tell us why the bite victim is afraid of the animatronics. And it also gives the opportunity for Afton to punish him for running away, because then it gives him, not only does Afton get to experiment on him with the fear gas, but also he punishes his son for running away. So then the bite victim ends up experiencing the fear experiments, and we know that he went through the nightmares at some point, because in the survival logbook, next to an image of Nightmare Fredbear that Michael drew, he says, or the Faded text asks the bite victim, "Do you have dreams?" Indicating that although Michael was the player of FNAF 4, the bite victim did see the nightmares at some point. So what that indicates is that the bite victim was in the experiments. And also, we know that he was afraid of the animatronics. So was it just because of the experiments? Maybe. But if that's the case, why was he in the experiments in the first place? And this has Afton wanting to punish his son for running away. So it gives that opportunity. It allows him to give him a way to punish him, and it gives him it gives him a reason to too. He doesn't have to have this. That doesn't have to be the way that he punished him, but it just gives a reason for us to know, rather than just leaving it kind of open-ended. And so if the bite victim is the runaway, then that indicates that this guy has to be Michael. It doesn't have to be, again, because some people suggest it's like Mrs. Afton, but personally I believe that Mrs. Afton is dead, and I believe that she's probably the person in the mound. Because there's a lot of books and stuff that have just this whole thing where a guy is a single father, and he has some type of tool to watch over his kid. A lot of those things are about a nice, loving father, sure, but the way that it works, it just reminds me a lot more of the Fredbear plushie and watching over his son and talking through it, like with Simon in The Real Jake, with the tag-along Freddy in The Cliffs, stuff like that. So, sure, the dad doesn't really, resemble Afton, but the situation resembles the Afton family more. So it indicates more to me that that in those stories, because there's no mother, either she's dead or she's not in the picture. I personally think she's dead because there's also the whole thing with Renelle in the novels. Her father is a man who is experimenting with Remnant. He has a business partner, and then that business partner dies by his creation, just like Henry in the books. And that was Talbert, and Taggart is the guy that experiments with Remnant, and his wife is dead. So, and then after his wife dies, he delves into his work. So my idea is that Afton, his wife dies, or maybe they divorce and then he gets her killed or something like that. And then after that, it kind of pushes him to, I guess, investigate the idea of immortality, because maybe he just doesn't want to die, something like that, I don't know. And then that results in then his wife getting buried in the mound. And then after that, that's why he starts experimenting with Remnant and stuff. So in that case, if that's what happens, then the wife can't be the guy sitting on the couch, and then because it's a gray shirt guy, and because they're watching TV, it just makes sense to be Michael. As for why he's trying to defend the bite victim, just because you bully your brother doesn't mean that you don't care about him. I'm the youngest of 3 kids. My brother's 5 years older than me. Yeah, you should see the shit that happened with me and my siblings when I was younger. Now, obviously, I have a great relationship with them, and even back then, we still loved each other, but they were assholes. But also, so was I, you know. So, it just because you bully your younger sibling doesn't mean you don't care about them. And also, there's this whole thing. A lot of people believe that a lot of older siblings have this complex where it's nobody's allowed to bully their younger son the younger sibling except them. So it's like they will bully their sibling, but if someone else is bullying their sibling, they'll beat the shit out of that guy, you know? And as for him, like, talking back to Afton, I feel like that doesn't matter that much, because I think the whole point here is the fact that Afton ignores Michael. So Michael can talk back to his father, and either he'll get the shit beaten out of him, and then then maybe he can divert the attention away from the bite victim, and he would get beaten up instead of his brother, and then he will have successfully protected his brother. Or he knows that Afton will probably just ignore him, so he's just making an attempt in general to get him to stop, but he just knows that it's not going to work anyway. And if it does work, then he'll get beaten up. So it's like, it works either way. I think that works fine. As for the footprints, I'm a believer that that's like Shadow Freddy. Because this is the night when Charlotte dies. And personally, I think that both of the Shadow animatronics were created from Charlotte dying. I think that Shadow Bonnie, because of like the whole thing with in FNAF AR, the remnant and like the dark remnant and stuff, it makes like whisper sounds. So I think, and that's where Shadow Bonnie appears. So in the epilogues of Frights, the puppet mask, whispers come from that mask. So although whispers aren't like a definitive character trait, I think that it makes sense for Charlotte to have some connection with Shadow Bonnie, especially since in FNAF 3, Shadow Bonnie is seen trying to put the pieces of the minigames together for Happiest Day. And sure, it's not like Balloon Boy or Golden Freddy are literally putting the pieces together, but the fact that Shadow Bonnie is kind of like teleporting between all the minigames, it's like he has control here in some way. So that to me indicates maybe he actually is a character. Or like a character like actually here. Like it's literally Shadow Bonnie doing it. So that to me indicates maybe Shadow Bonnie is like a good spirit trying to help the kids. And he has some connection with Charlotte. So then he could be created from the agony of her dying. As for Shadow Freddy, we know from Ultimate Custom Night, from Nightmare's voice line, that he is William's wickedness made of flesh. Which basically means that he's made from Afton's, like, anger and all that. And we know Nightmare is Shadow Freddy from the FNAF 4 files. So it works for Shadow Freddy to be created from his anger and stuff when he does kill Charlotte. And the reason that it's Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Freddy, because I think that Charlotte died at Fredbear's, and those are the two animatronics that were there, right? So yeah, I think that it makes sense that Shadow Freddy, after Afton killed Charlotte, was created and then went to the bite victim's window. And then because the bite victim liked Fredbear, which we know because he has the Fredbear plushie, he stands at the window, and the bite victim maybe thinks that Shadow Freddy is Fredbear. And that also explains the thing that that Scott wrote on the website in the FNAF 4 days of what is seen in shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. So he sees Shadow Freddy in the shadows, thinks it's Golden Freddy, misinterprets it, misunderstands it. So then Shadow Freddy lures him away, probably to Fredbear's. Maybe he even sees Charlotte's dead body and thinks that Fredbear killed her. That explains why he's so afraid of Fredbear. And then Afton gets home, punishes him, makes him go through the fear experiments. And then, yeah, then he ends up being afraid of the animatronics, and then he dies because of that. So you're saying he liked Fredbear at one point? Yeah, we know he did, because he has the plushies and stuff. But he's afraid of the animatronics. He wouldn't have a plushie of the animatronic that he's so afraid of if he was always afraid of him. He was clearly a fan of him at some point, and then something happens. He saw something, as we know from FNAF 4, that caused him to become afraid of them. So yeah, that's my full opinion on Midnight Motorist. It's Afton going home, going past Michael, ignoring him, and then finding that the bite victim ran away from home, following Shadow Freddy to Fredbear's Family Diner. And that's what I think. And the reason that it exists, it's to show that Afton was drunk when he killed Charlotte, and it shows how Shadow Freddy was created from Charlotte's death, and then it shows why the bite victim is afraid of the animatronics, and gives a reason for Afton to punish him by putting him in the fear experiments. So it does answer a lot in this case. Obviously, this is my theory. I could be completely wrong about it. I'm not saying I'm completely right. I'm just giving my full opinion. You guys can, by all means, disagree. I'm just saying this is my personal opinion. But there's 21, 22 minutes left of this video, so maybe he'll sway me. You never know. And if not, then I'll explain what I disagree with, why I disagree with it. I won't just, like, brush past everything, obviously. I won't just be like, oh, I think he's wrong because I think I'm right. I mean, like, I'll give reasons for why I think certain things. And, like, some things I might not have, like, something against the idea, other than just, like, I think my idea could be stronger. And that's not, like, me saying he has to be wrong. It's just me saying, like, I prefer this idea over this idea, but I understand where you're coming from, basically. So we all have our own beliefs, so let's continue, and I will find out what his are.
Who is the person watching TV? Who is the runaway? What was buried in the middle of the woods? Where did the runaway run off to? And why are there animatronic footprints by the bushes? In order to answer these questions, we're gonna do something a little bit different. Let's look at this minigame from the perspective of the developer, starting with the person watching TV. When Scott made this part of the minigame, he likely started with this, a blank room with nothing in it. He then knew he wanted to add a specific character to the room, likely a member of the Afton family. Scott then decided to add 3 details to help us better understand who this is. He had the person sit and watch TV, wear a gray shirt, and talk with gray text. These are all traits that belong to Michael Afton.
Yeah.
In FNAF 4, Michael wears a gray shirt, uses gray text, and in Sister Location is known for going home, sitting on a chair, and watching TV.
Exactly.
The only 3 details we get about this character perfectly line up with Michael. But if this is Michael Afton, who is the boy who escaped out his bedroom window? Well, by process of elimination, it has to be the only boy left in the Afton family, the crying child. Need more proof?
Yes.
In FNAF 4, we learned that Michael Afton is in charge of babysitting the crying child, and in that game, we constantly see them home alone together, just like we see in Midnight Motorist. Also, one of the main things we learn about the crying child comes from one of the very first lines we get in FNAF 4. Quote, "What did he do this time? He locked you in your room again." Whenever Michael wasn't terrorizing his younger brother, he would constantly lock him in his room. And what do we see in Midnight Motorist? Michael and the crying child home alone with Michael watching TV while the crying child is locked in his room,
yeah.
matching perfectly with everything we learned from FNAF 4. So far, we've answered 2 questions with some pretty solid evidence to back them up, but we still have 3 questions left, with the next one being a big one. What is the pile of dirt in the clearing? This random pile of dirt has driven me nuts for over 7 years now, and in my opinion, it is the biggest mystery in all of FNAF. Here's why.
Really?
Unlike other parts of Midnight Motorist, there's literally nothing to connect this pile of dirt back to. The person sitting in the living room had specific...
I think it's just meant to be that Afton killed somebody and buried them there. Or someone died that Afton knows and he buried them there. The question is just, where does he bury them? Or sorry, who is he burying? And why does he bury them there? Because it's close to his house, so if it's discovered, then he'll be found. It might just be like I said, that Afton's wife died, and then he buried her there. I don't think the dirt pile means anything. I think it means something, but I don't think it's too important. I think it's just meant to be someone died and Afton buried them.
traits that connected directly back to...
If the runaway was Michael, I think it would make sense that it's the bite victim's body. If the runaway is the bite victim, then I think it makes sense that it's the Mrs. Afton's body, because she probably dies, in my opinion.
Michael Afton. The runaway motorist, there's literally nothing to connect this pile of dirt back to. The person sitting in the living room had specific traits that connected directly back to Michael Afton. The runaway has specific traits that connect it right to the crying child. This pile of dirt has nothing. Every time the pile of dirt is mentioned in official FNAF media, it's referred to as a secret grave. And I think the community has collectively agreed that that's what it is.
Yeah.
Someone or something was buried here. And since we have basically nothing to go off of, let's once again look at this from the perspective of the developer. When Scott was making Midnight Motorist, he knew he wanted to add this grave. But instead of putting it in a cemetery or a hill by a tree like we see at the end of the game, he put it in the middle of the woods, clearly intending it to be hidden. The fact that the grave is so hidden in quote secret implies that whatever was buried here is part of some sort of crime, or at least
Yeah, I
something
agree.
that someone wants to cover up. So in order to figure out whose grave this is, let's go through the list of crimes in this franchise. First, we have Charlie. Maybe after her death, Afton decided to cover it all up by burying her body in the middle of the woods. But we know that's not the case because we literally
he
see
just
Afton
killed her.
drive away after the murder, leaving her body outside in the rain. So we know it's not Charlie. Another popular theory in the community is that this is where the crying child was buried. But like we established earlier, the crying child is likely the runaway, so he would still be alive at this point. So the crying child
just depends
is
on what you
also
believe.
off the table. I've heard some people say that this could be the grave of Mrs. Afton, but that feels a little too random. Not only is there no
That's
mention
fair.
of Mrs.
I think it just
Afton
depends,
dying
like,
in this
on what you
franchise,
believe.
there's only one vague mention of her existence at all. In the TV show Immortal and the Restless from Sister Location, we do seem to get a parallel to Mr. and Mrs. Afton in Vlad and Clara, but that's literally it. Mrs. Afton isn't very
Yeah, the idea in Midnight Motorist is that they're divorced, right? But the thing is, if you look at, sorry, if you look at the retro CDs and Security Breach, there's the whole thing with Vanessa's backstory, where her father, William, he divorced his wife, and then in court, forced Vanessa, or maybe like meant to be Elizabeth, or the bite victim, or somebody. He got somebody, one of his kids, to talk badly about his mother in court, so that he can get custody. And then after that, apparently, Vanessa's mom something, which implies she killed herself or something like that. So her death was Afton's fault. And then after that, Afton maybe finds her and then he kills her. Another thing that could actually lead to that is in Midnight Motorist itself, we know that we're playing as William Afton. We know that for a fact now because of 5 Laps at Freddy's. But the house is completely different to the FNAF 4 house. Like the Afton house in the FNAF 4 minigames. So why is it different? Clearly because it's a different house, right? There's no Fredbears around the Midnight Motorist house, so it's not just like a different design. It's just a different house completely. So the idea could be that maybe they divorced. Mrs. Afton moved out, maybe into the clearing in the forest. She lived there, and then she killed herself. Afton found her body, and then buried her nearby, and then he just took the house too. So he just has multiple houses. Or he just bought it, because like he's the founder, one of the co-founders of Fazbear Entertainment, so he probably has a decent amount of money. So I think that works pretty well.
satisfying and doesn't have much to back it up, so she's out of the running. Next up, we have Elizabeth. I actually really like the idea of it being Elizabeth's grave, because her death was a freak accident entirely caused by William. Not only that, we know that Afton actively tried covering it up. When Elizabeth died and Circus Babies closed, Afton hid the truth from the public by saying that the restaurant closed down due to gas leaks. So it would totally make sense that Afton would want to hide her body. But
personally, I think that Elizabeth died after the bite victim and before the missing children incident. So if that is the case, then it can't be her either, because she wouldn't be dead yet by this point. But then that also begs the question of where she is in Midnight Motorist. So like, it could be her. I also find it a little bit weird that she would die before Charlotte. It's technically possible, but I find it a little bit weird. And it's also a little bit strange for her body to be buried, because I've always kind of interpreted her death as her being sucked in by Circus Baby. Not sucked in, she's not a vacuum, but her being, like, captured by Circus Baby and just being there. Like, obviously her body could be removed, but I never interpreted it that way. I always kind of thought she just died in the chest and is still in there. Obviously not necessarily the case. She could have been removed. I've just never really thought that she did, but it could be. So if she did die before Charlotte, then the grave could be from her, for sure.
But in order for this to work, Elizabeth would had to have died before Charlie and the crying child. And I just don't see Afton creating animatronics specifically built to capture kids that early in the timeline. So although I do like it, and it could make sense if we get more information, I don't think this grave belongs to Elizabeth. So if you haven't noticed yet, we are quickly running out of dead people. And at this point, I was about to give up. Every answer I could come up with felt unsatisfying because there was no evidence to back it up. So before before I gave up, I decided to try one last thing, actually play the game. But this time, I would really analyze it from the developer's point of view, like we've been doing this whole video. And it was during this one playthrough that I discovered the theory that I'm gonna share with you today. In FNAF 6, there are 3 lore-heavy minigames: Fruity Maze, Midnight Motorist, and Charlie's Death minigame. The first thing I noticed was in order to get the lore keeper ending of the game, you need to complete all 3 of these minigames. This is interesting because there are other things you can buy in FNAF 6 that feature lore, such as Candy Cadet and Egg Baby, but those ones aren't required to get the lore keeper ending. Scott purposely paired these 3 minigames together. Why? Well, we know that the security puppet minigame and Midnight Motorist are directly connected. Midnight Motorist literally takes place directly after Charlie's Death minigame. The minigames are so connected, in fact, that I started asking myself the question, why does Fruity Maze even exist? That may sound odd, but really think about it. The security puppet minigame revealed that Charlie possesses the puppet and gave us more info on how that happened. Midnight Motorist revealed important context behind Charlie's death, showcasing that Afton was under the influence when it happened. It also showed us exactly where he sped off to. Candy Cadet told us the story of 5 things becoming one thing, explaining how all of the spirits ended up in Molten Freddy. Egg Baby gave us Henry's insanity ending speech, which is arguably the biggest lore drop in the entire franchise. All of this stuff is super important to understanding the lore of these games and the franchise as a whole. And then there's Fruity Maze. Fruity Maze tells us the story of how Susie, the kid who goes on to possess Chica, was lured into the back room by Afton, and that's it. This minigame feels odd because it's not required to understand anything. We already knew that Afton lured the kids into the back room, and Scott even reveals Susie's name at the end of the game. The only purpose of the minigame is to show the specifics of how Afton lured Susie into the back room. So that again begs the question, what is the purpose of this minigame? Well, like I said earlier, Scott purposely paired this minigame with Midnight Motorist and Charlie's Death. And just like how Midnight Motorist gives added context to Charlie's Death minigame, I think Fruity Maze gives added context to Midnight Motorist. I actually think all 3 of the minigames are connected to each other. In Fruity Maze, we learn exactly how Afton lured Susie into the back room. It's revealed that Susie's dog had died, and Afton told her, quote, "He's not really dead. He's over here. Follow me." What if I told you that it's not a human buried in the woods in Midnight Motorist, it's Susie's dog? Let me explain. The more you play the Fruity Maze minigame, the more it starts to break.
But
first you
actually, no, it doesn't, because that requires Susie to have been killed before the bite victim and Charlotte. And although the Help 1 and 2 grave order kind of made people more open to the idea of the missing kids being killed before Charlotte, I think if Charlotte died before the bite victim, that doesn't really work. And the missing kids being killed before the bite victim also doesn't really work. For a few reasons. One, Charlotte was killed in 1983, and we know that. Not only from the 4th closet, but also you get the puppet plushie in Help 1 and 2 by typing in 1983 into the keypad. So we know that Charlotte died in 1983. So that requires the missing kids to be killed before the bite victim and in 1983 or sooner. Or not sooner, because Freddy's opened in 1983. So that does require either the Help 1 and 2 grave order to not work, or for the missing kids to be just just in 1983, which I think doesn't really work just because we know it's in 1985 by now. So it doesn't really work very well in that case. So yeah, I don't think that it being Susie's dog really works either. But I do want to listen to what he says.
You see a bunch of fruit scattered throughout the maze. Then you start to see Susie's dog alongside the fruit. And in the final phase of the minigame, the fruit is gone and we see 3 things: Susie's dog, a mini coffin, and flowers. The music in the minigame then cuts out and you start hearing a car alarm. After the car alarm, you then see Afton show up behind her. The car alarm indicates that Susie's dog was hit by a car, and the coffin and flowers indicate that the dog was buried somewhere. The fact that Afton knows that her dog died match with the eerie car alarm playing before Afton shows up tells me that Afton had something to do with her dog's death. The absolute nail in the coffin for this comes from the final detail we see in this minigame. Randomly scattered throughout the final phase of the minigame among the dead dog, coffin, and flowers is a yellow rabbit digging a hole in the dirt. Scott added a sprite of a yellow rabbit, aka...
I have never noticed that he's digging a hole. Honestly, I don't know what I thought he was doing. I just never realized that. But that's actually pretty good evidence.
William Afton that dug a hole in the ground. And in Midnight Motorist, we see something down the road from Afton's house buried in the dirt in a clearing right next to the road. Why?
Okay, now, I disagree that the grave would be from the dog, because, like I said, the dog would have died in 1985, right before Susie, not in 1983. Otherwise, what's the point of the date 1985? I think the missing children incident was definitely 1985, not 1983. So this doesn't really work in my opinion. But I do think that that's actually pretty good evidence.
Why did Scott show us the story of how Afton
I agree that Afton killed the dog.
Well, it's because it gives us
and buried it somewhere, but I don't think that's the grave for the dog.
Therefore, connecting all three of these minigames as part of the Lore Keeper ending. In all of the FNAF games, this is the only time we've seen anything relating to Afton burying something in the dirt, and it comes from a minigame that was intentionally paired with Midnight Motorist. So now the question becomes, why? Why create this storyline about Susie's dog and then immediately show us where it was buried in the very next minigame? Well, the answer is he did it to establish a timeline. By showing us what happens directly after Charlie gets killed, we're able to see which characters are still alive. In Midnight Motorist, we see that Michael and the Crying Child are still alive directly after Charlie was killed, which means that the Crying Child must die after Charlie. The inclusion of the dirt mound, though, throws a whole new wrench into the timeline. If this mound of dirt was put there to imply that Susie's dog was already dead and buried before Charlie died, that would mean that the missing children's incident likely happened before Charlie and the Crying Child's deaths, effectively making it the first major event in the timeline. This goes against pretty much every interpretation of the timeline I've ever seen, but for fun, I decided to keep going and see if there's actually evidence to back it up. Could the missing children's incident really be the first event in the timeline? Well, the first thing I thought of was the FNAF 4 minigames. In those minigames, we see the Crying Child walk up to a little girl who says, quote, "You'd better watch out, I hear they come to life at night, and if you..."
There's definitely some evidence out there for this, for the missing children incident being before the bite of 83, but I think by now it's pretty clear that the missing children incident is 1985, so it doesn't really work very well.
Die, they hide
Not
your
anymore,
body
at least.
and never tell anyone. This is odd because the commonly believed year of the missing children's incident is 1985, and we know that this minigame takes place in 1983. That means that the rumors of kids
It would
being
be
stuffed
really
into
convenient,
animatronics existed
timeline-wise,
in 1983,
and it would be
before the
really
Crying
nice
Child was
and
even
helpful,
dead yet, which would
but
line
it
up
doesn't
with the
really
missing
work,
children's
unfortunately.
incident being the first
I do
event
think that
in
he
the
has pretty good
timeline.
evidence
While
for it, though.
replaying FNAF 6, I also noticed a weird detail about the Charlie death minigame. One thing about Scott's 8-bit minigames is that they have little to no details, so much so that we don't even know which pizzeria this minigame takes place
I think
in.
probably
Scott really
Fredbear's.
only adds details that are required to understand the basics of what's going on. So when we get to the part of the minigame where we go outside, you can see that Scott added rain and garbage cans to show that we're on the side of the building. But one other thing he decided to add were posters taped to the walls. This is a common thing you'd see on the side of a building, but what's interesting is the type of poster it is. Scattered on the walls outside of the pizzeria are wanted posters. In a minigame that has little to no detail, Scott took the time to make a wanted poster featuring the outline of a man wearing a hat. Not only that, he scattered the same poster all over the walls. A popular trope in movies and TV shows is
The thing is, Afton doesn't wear a hat, and he wears a spring Bonnie suit. And we already know that he gets arrested after the missing children incident, meaning there can't be wanted posters for him, because he would have already been arrested, and then his name would have been cleared. So, it doesn't really make sense for those posters to be about him.
is to hang a
I don't know what they
comical
would be
amount of
about, to be
wanted
clear.
posters of the same person all over the
So I get the
place.
idea,
It's a way
but
to
I just don't
emphasize
know what else
how
it would be.
important it is for this person to be caught. And it seems that Scott did the same thing here. By putting a bunch of wanted posters outside of a Freddy's restaurant, it's almost like Scott was trying to show us that a criminal having something to do with Freddy's was on the loose when Charlie was killed. And I think that criminal could be William Afton. If Midnight Motorist really is showing us that the MCI happened first, these wanted posters would be a great way to show us through environmental storytelling that William Afton already was a wanted criminal before Charlie got killed. And one of the strongest
Yeah, it's just he was
pieces of
arrested
evidence for this
immediately.
actually comes from one voice.
So there would have been no
line in
need
Ultimate
for
Custom
wanted
Night.
posters.
I was the first. I have seen everything.
Chica says, "I was the first. I have seen everything." This voice line blows my mind because in a series where Scott has stated that he likes to clear up misconceptions from past games in future games, he decided to add a voice line in the very last FNAF game he ever made that says, "I was the first. I have seen everything." This heavily implies that Susie was the first murder in the franchise, which would make sense if the MCI happened first. Another piece of evidence comes from Help Wanted 2, where we see 6 graves for Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, Golden Freddy, and the puppet. But there's a specific order that we need to light them in. That order has Chica first, Foxy, Bonnie, Freddy, Golden Freddy, and then the puppet. This matches perfectly.
I've always kind of just said that because Charlotte had to die in 1983 and the missing children incident was 1985, it doesn't make sense for this to be the order at all. And sure, like, what else would the order be? I don't know. But it's also this game itself that tells us that the puppet spirit, Charlotte, was killed in 1983. So it doesn't make sense for it to be immediately going back on that statement, you know? Unless, like he's saying, the missing children incident was just in 1983. But then that just, like, gets rid of 1985 completely. So, like, what's the point of that, you know?
With everything we've discussed so far. Chica was the first, she's seen everything, followed by the rest of the MCI, and then Charlie. All of this stuff shows that there is evidence to back up this timeline of events, which means that this very well could be where Susie's dog was buried. So that's 3 of the 5 questions with a pretty satisfying answer to back it up. But now we get to the actual hardest questions to answer in this minigame. Where did the crying child run off to, and why are there animatronic footprints by the bushes? Unlike the pile of dirt in the clearing, we actually have dialogue we can analyze that's related to the scene. When William Afton comes home to see that his son escaped out his bedroom window, he says, quote, "Ran off to that place again. He will be sorry when he gets back." The most important part of this dialogue is the word again. Ran off to that place again implies that this is a pattern of behavior. Afton also immediately knows where he ran off to. This isn't the first time the crying child has done this. That then begs the question, where is he running off to? One possible option comes from the Twisted Ones, which released 6 months before FNAF 6. In the book, Charlie gets kidnapped by one of the Twisted animatronics, and her friends are desperately trying to find her. While her friends are looking for her, Shadow Freddy appears in the woods, and her friend says, quote, "I don't know what it is, but I think it wants us to follow."
Exactly. And that's not even the only thing that implies that it's Shadow Freddy outside the window. There's also the story You're the Band, which has a shadow which has the shadow go to a kid's window and bring him to a Freddy's location. So it doesn't necessarily have to be Freddy's, as long as it's just like a Fazbear restaurant, that works fine. But the fact that it's Shadow Freddy luring a kid from his window to a Freddy's location, I think that just by itself is great. But then coupling it with the Twisted Ones, and then everything else I was talking about earlier as to like why Shadow Freddy would exist by now, I think it just makes a lot of sense for it to be Shadow Freddy.
Shadow Freddy then lures them directly to Charlie. What Shadow Freddy is and why it did this is never explained in the book, but what if it helps explain Midnight Motorist? What if, just like in the book, Shadow Freddy appeared outside of the crying child's window and lured him to Charlie? In FNAF 4, we're told repeatedly that the reason the crying child is scared of the pizzeria is because he saw something. So what if the thing that he saw was Charlie getting killed outside outside of the pizzeria. This theory is
Not
pretty
necessarily
popular
her
in the
getting
community
killed.
and is similar to Idy's Fantasy's take.
Not
on
necessarily her
Midnight
getting killed,
Motorist. Every
but finding
time
her
we see
body
the
at
crying
least.
child in FNAF 4, he is
Because if he sees her getting killed, then Shadow Freddy can't really exist yet unless he was created from something else completely. Which he could be, but I'm not sure what else it would be.
terrified of Fredbears. But Midnight Motorist showed us that that wasn't always the case. It turns out that the crying child used to run off to that place all the time. He loved going there until he saw Charlie get killed outside of the pizzeria.
I think he just always went normally, just because he wanted to. And then this time specifically, it was Shadow Freddy that brought him. Otherwise, he would have just stayed home, or he would have gone of his own accord, but him seeing Shadow Freddy itself lured him. So, like, it's not like I don't think that Shadow Freddy did this over and over again, because I don't think he existed before this minigame. I think that the bite victim constantly ran away, but this time in particular, it was because of Shadow Freddy.
I really like this explanation, and it's because it gives a solid reason for why Scott set Midnight Motorist on the same night as Charlie's death. The reason he showed us that the crying child ran off to the pizzeria the same night Charlie was killed was to connect those two events. Midnight Motorist showed us that the crying child wasn't always scared of the pizzeria, while also showing us the night that all changed. Also, Shadow Freddy luring the crying child to Charlie not only matches up with the Twisted Ones, but also FNAF 3, where we see Shadow Freddy luring the animatronics in the Follow Me minigames. This is a great explanation and is super satisfying, but I do have a few problems with it. In FNAF 4, when the crying child is left alone at Fredbear's, he's told to run towards the exit. But if you try to go further into the pizzeria, you hear, quote, "No, don't you remember what you saw? The exit is the other way. Hurry and leave." This implies that what the crying child saw was further inside of the pizzeria. The crying child wouldn't want to go outside if what he saw was Charlie being killed outside.
Yeah, but this also ties into what I was saying earlier, that he could have thought that Shadow Freddy was Fredbear. So going further inside would mean getting closer to Fredbear. So that explains that away.
Also, 2 months after FNAF 4 came out, Scott gave us 3 clues to help figure out the game, with one of them being what is seen in shadows is easily
and that's also explained by what I just
misunderstood
said.
in the mind of a child. This is Scott outright telling us that the crying child didn't actually see anything bad happen, he misunderstood what he saw.
Not necessarily.
There's a reason that
It doesn't necessarily have to be that he didn't see anything bad. It could just be that he misinterpreted exactly what he did see. So he saw something bad, Charlotte's dead body, but he misinterpreted it, thinking that, first of all, Shadow Freddy was Fredbear, and second of all, thinking that Fredbear killed her.
after we get the line, "Don't you remember what you saw?" we see this Easter egg. An employee in the shadows of the back room putting on a Bonnie suit. The crying child saw this and thought someone was being stuffed into a suit. This is why he wants to leave the pizzeria and is scared of the animatronics. When confronted with one, he's told, quote, "It's too late. Hurry the other way and find someone who will help. You know what will happen if he catches you." That he is clearly referring to the Fredbear mascot that just appeared in front of him.
Yes.
So although
the idea here in this case would be that he didn't want to go further into Fredbear's because he didn't want to get closer to Fredbear, and then out the exit there's another Fredbear, so he has to go further into Fredbear's because even though there is another Fredbear there, better than being right next to this one, you know.
of the theory of Crying Child being lured by Shadow Freddy and witnessing Charlie's death, it's not perfect. Speaking of things not being perfect, this whole theory isn't perfect. Susie's dog being buried in the clearing and the MCI being the first event in the franchise has evidence to back it up. But time and time again, in the Silver Eyes trilogy, Fazbear Frights, and the Into the Pit game, Scott has established that the MCI happened in 1985, making it impossible for it to be the first event in the timeline. You could argue that those books and the Into the Pit game take place in a different continuity, but with how many times Scott has stuck with that theory, I doubt he would change it for the main games. And with that, the entire theory falls apart. But that's kind of the point of this video. I wanted to show you the process of what it's like to theorize about this minigame. From getting excited about finally finding some solid answers with solid evidence to back them up, to finding the one or two things that make it all fall apart.
Yeah, it makes sense.
The theory I shared with you today does contain my best guesses for what this minigame was trying to show us. But at the same time, I don't believe all of it. night. I love the idea of Susie's dog being buried in the clearing. I even decided to look this up to see if anyone's thought of this before, and it turns out a couple people have. But in order for this to work, the MCI can't happen in 1985, and I believe it does. I also don't think the graves in Help Wanted 2 are showing us a death order. I think they're probably showing us the order the spirits moved on. In the Happiest Day minigame, you can see the MCI victims' masks drop first.
I mean, I don't think it's that they moved on in this order, because I think that they all move on at the same time, but it takes longer for them to be able to move on, I think.
Charlie's then dropping last, matching with the grave order. The thing is, it feels like Scott's been trying to give us answers for this minigame for years now. There's multiple stories in Fazbear Frights about a kid being lured out of their house by an animatronic and taken to Freddy's. We also recently got the Midnight Motorist level in 5 Laps at Freddy's, which confirmed Afton is the Orange Man. And finally, we have the FNAF movie, where Scott literally showed us a version of Midnight Motorist playing out in real time. During the night, Golden Freddy shows up to Abby's house, where we see someone sitting in a chair watching TV and Abby in her room. Golden Freddy then sneaks Abby out of her house and takes her to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And the funny thing is that this could also work in the games. Just like Abby, the crying child is also being taken care of by his older brother Mike. The crying child also has a close relationship with his plushies, just like Abby. Abby calls the animatronics her friends in the movie. The crying child calls his Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy plushies his friends in the games. The crying child could easily be friends with the animatronics. And Midnight Motorist could be Golden Freddy sneaking the crying child out of his house at night to go hang out at the pizzeria, just like in the movie. But like we established earlier, this would only make sense if the MCI happened first, which seems unlikely. Midnight Motorist is one of the biggest mysteries in all of FNAF because of its extreme lack of detail and lack of things to connect it back to. And this could very well be on purpose. In the recent interview Dawko did with Scott, he talked about how he makes his games.
You know, whenever I'm making these games, there are a lot of things that are in my head that are just flowing ideas. And when I have them and put them there, it's the first half of something. It's like a string or a rope just like reaching out, and I know that what's there on the other end is there. I trust that it's there. I know that it's there. And then whenever I progress forward, the rest of that just reappears. The rest of it appears and just fits into place perfectly. That's how all my games have been made. I feel that there is something there, and I make the roads to get there for that to be revealed.
Scott loves foreshadowing and laying the groundwork for something to be explained later. So Midnight Motorist could be Scott giving us the first half of something with the rest being revealed later on. Who knows? This minigame is a great representation of FNAF as a whole. There are so many ways you can make everything work, but you can't achieve that without filling in some big gaps in the story yourself. At least for now. Subscribe if you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.
Alright, good video. I like a lot of the stuff he said. He had some issues with the Shadow Freddy idea, and then I offered my solutions for it. But yeah, that was my idea. And that was his idea, and a bunch of his ideas, and me giving my idea, and why I disagree with some, and why I agree with others. Anyway, that was all for that reaction. So, what now?